Since the dawn of mankind, people have wondered which Spider-Man movie is the best. I'm here to answer that age-old question and rank all 9 Spider-Man movies that I have seen. Anyways, let's just jump right into it. I want to preface this list by saying that I actually like every single Spider-Man movie. There are some that I think are worse than others, obviously, but I think all of them have value, and I just really like Spider-Man as a character. So even the worst of these is still a pretty good movie in my opinion. Starting out at number 9 is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And where I think this really failed was in trying to set up a universe similar to what the MCU had. Sony kind of wanted to use Spider-Man as like the figure of their shared universe. They were going to put Venom and Kraven the Hunter and all these other villains in a Spider-Man universe. And it's just, that's where the movie failed. They tried to jam too much into it. All the villains in this movie were weird. Electro was a weird blue nerd man, and I just didn't find him very interesting, compelling. Green Goblin was just an inferior version to previous versions that we had seen. Speaking on that, the relationship between Harry Osborn and Peter Parker in this movie was just not believable. I didn't buy that they were best friends. Harry Osborn kind of comes out of nowhere into Peter's life, and I'm just meant to believe that they've been best friends this whole time. Just didn't buy it. The dumb backstory of this movie where Peter's family was like super spies or something, just kind of dumb. It's just not Spider-Man-y. I will admit there are a lot of emotional moments in this movie that are great, especially between Gwen and Peter. The way she died at the end, while I didn't want her to die, can't fault the story for that. I thought she died in an interesting way that challenged Peter Parker and was pretty unexpected if you didn't know the comic books. I also think that he had an excellent suit, one of the best suits. I don't think it matches the Tobey one, but it's much better than the first Amazing Spider-Man suit. Next up, I think everyone's going to hate me, is SpiderMan Homecoming. I just think this feels too MCU. And by that, I mean there's too much interference from a larger universe outside of Spider-Man. I think Spider-Man works great, sort of has his own character in his own world. I like when he interacts with others, but he really is sort of the down-to-earth, ground-level superhero who saves the little guy. And when he's around all those other big superheroes like Iron Man and Captain America and all that, I just think that it's a little too much. There's also too much interference from Iron Man. He gives him his suit, he gives him gadgets, he saves him when he's in trouble. I know the whole movie's about Spider-Man learning to do it on his own, but I just felt that the finale of the film was lackluster. I liked Vulture as a villain, but that final fight scene is just explosions and up in the sky. There's not much web slinging going on. Spider-Man doesn't even throw very many punches. It's just a lackluster finale. And the movie's not bad. It's just not what I wanted from Spider-Man at the time. Next up is The Amazing Spider-Man. And for this one, I don't love the costume. It's probably the only one that I really don't like. The eyes are too thin. They look like sunglasses. And I get they wanted to make it look like, he actually made it. But it's just not very visually appealing. Peter Parker is too cool as well. He's just some cool skater dude. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I feel like the movie's afraid to take risks. It feels very by the book, like superhero stories. Like he gets his powers, he gets a girlfriend, he's challenged by the girlfriend's dad, and then, he saves the day at the end. It didn't feel very interesting. I like Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. They're great actors and they bring a lot to the movie. But overall, I thought this was one of the weaker Spider-Man movies. Next up is Spider-Man Far From Home, and I still have the same problems I had with the previous MCU Spider-Man movie, where there's a lot of interference from outside Marvel forces. But this one I think is better. There's a lot more interesting Spider-Man action. It kind of focuses on him discovering like his spider sense, and I like the villain a lot better, Mysterio. So this one I think is more the same from MCU Spider-Man, but just a better movie overall. Now here, we're getting into the good ones if you're asking me. Number 5 is Spider-Man 3, and I know this is critically panned, like no one likes it, but I think this is an absolute blast to watch. I mean, just from the memes that this movie has created gives it value. It's so corny and cheesy and funny, but at the same time, I think this has great action scenes. Spider-Man versus Sandman and New Goblin and even Venom. I think that there's some great action in this movie. And it's so dumb and stupid. The story doesn't make any sense. Peter Parker, becomes evil, but I think he looks great in that black suit. And sure, maybe the story suffered and the villains were kind of weird, but I love this movie. I think it's great. Corniness and all. I think it's great. Next up, number 4, Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, this is homages on homages. It's a love letter to the Spider-Man universe. If you like Spider-Man, then you're going to love this movie. The only thing is, I don't think it stands on its own, but that's okay because it acts as a sequel to 3 movies at once. It's a sequel to Spider-Man 3, No Way Home, and, the Amazing Spider-Man 2. It just does a great job bringing all the Spider-Man together, this chemistry between all the leads, and it just is so satisfying to watch. The only reason it's not higher is because it couldn't exist without the movies that came before it, the great movies that came before it. So it's great because those were great, if you know what I mean. Another thing that it does is it's the best MCU outing for Tom Holland's Spider-Man by far. I love where the character ends up. It restores the status quo of Spider-Man. No one knows his secret identity. He's poor. He's got no help from anyone outside, his little circle, which is honestly just him, actually, because no one knows who Spider-Man is. So I'm really excited about where the MCU is going to go with Spider-Man. Next up is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, this one did the multiverse before it was cool, kinda. It sort of set the precedent that Spider-Man can exist with a bunch of different versions of Spider-Man. And I think No Way Home never would have happened if Into the Spider-Verse wasn't so successful. Now, it may be a bit controversial to put this animated film above No Way Home, but I just thought this was such a great movie the first time I watched it. It really came out of nowhere. I love learning the origin of a new Spider-Man while not discarding the original. They really, respected what came before, and I thought, while Miles Morales had a great role in this movie, I also thought Peter Parker, the original, had a great role as well. And I really loved how they merged together with other interesting and fun versions of Spider-Man. On top of all that, I thought the unique animation style and, stunning visuals really made this a great movie. And one of the best Spider-Man movies of all time, in my opinion. And I can't wait for the sequel, which looks like it's going to be just as good. Now we're getting into the top 2 here. And again, controversially putting at number 2, Spider-Man 2. Now, this one has one of the best villains in all Spider-Man movies in Doc Ock. Just a great sympathetic villain. He's got a very interesting and unique power set. And the way he interacts with Spider-Man and Peter Parker is just awesome. The action is even better than the first movie. And the only reason that this is not the top spot is because I think the movie kind of slows down when Spider-Man doesn't have his powers. But other than that, it's bigger and better than the first movie in the way action is portrayed. In that train fight scene, one of the best fight scenes of all movies. So really a great movie. And this is just a big part of my childhood, which is sort of why I love these Tobey Maguire movies more than the other movies. Now for the number 1 pick, my number 1 pick. Most people will tell you Spider-Man 2 is the pinnacle of Spider-Man movies, but I say Spider-Man is the pinnacle. I just think this movie is deliciously corny. All the lines are so, it knows what it is. It knows it's a comic book movie. It's very self-aware, but at the same time, very earnest, and that's just what's so lovable about it. It's one of the most enjoyable superhero origin stories of all time, I think. It sort of paved the way for all these movies that came after it, and when I think of Spider-Man, this is what I think of. On top of all that, it's got great action scenes. The fights in this, a lot of the movies now with the CGI, they look cool, but there's no real weight to any of the punches. And these ones, there's weight to everything that both Spider-Man and Green Goblin do. I mean, when Spider-Man gets punched or thrown, you can see his mask gets torn up, he gets blown up. Everything looks like it hurts, and it looks like it's got a real impact. And that's what's so great about these fight scenes. As I mentioned already, it's got an iconic villain in Willem Dafoe's portrayal of the Green Goblin. He's just perfect for this character. He killed it in No Way Home, but this is where it all started. I love his origin. He's such a cornball, he's such a goofball, but he somehow is a menacing, crazy, villain with he's sort of like, he's got an evil side, but he also is fighting it a little bit, and I just think it's great. The plot of the movie is simple, but it really allows you to focus on the conflict between Spider-Man and Green Goblin. And on top of all that, it's just great nostalgia. I remember watching this. I remember being scared by it. It was scary. But this movie has such a personality, and it started it all off. Great action. I think the CGI looks kind of dated, but I think it holds up well enough that you can still enjoy the movie for what it is. And I think this is the best Spider-Man movie of all time. So that's my list for Spider-Man movies. I'm sure you disagree, which is fine. I think all these movies are great. I really like all of them, and I can't wait for more Spider-Man movies in the future. Until next time, arrivederci, or whatever.